My name's Christy Bolingbroke. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron, NCCAkron. And it is my sincere pleasure this evening to be speaking with Antonio Brown as part of an Artist Talk Happy Hour hosted by GroundWorks Dance Theater Artistic Director David Shimo Takahara, who brilliantly paired us this evening. And to be able to speak with an upcoming choreographer who will be setting a work on GroundWorks, Antonio Brown. Antonio, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure.
Virtual applause all
Yay.
around. And let's start with some of the just perfunctory details. You are safe and well and currently calling in from where?
I am safe, well, a little tired just because I've been working so much, which is great news. But coming to you from New York.
Fantastic.
My apartment. Yes.
Yes. But Ohio awaits you as a homecoming because you actually grew up in Cleveland. And I'm wondering if you might talk to us a little bit. What was it like to grow up in Cleveland? And specifically, how did you find dance as part of your growing up here?
Growing up in Cleveland was so many things. It was, of course, my birthplace. I was born and raised there. Hold so many treasures and memories there, and I'm still often there. So always happy to be returning home whenever I can. Yeah, I mean, I grew up an only child, very hyper energetic, loved to use my imagination and play. I had tons of friends, very active all the time. And I spent a lot of my younger childhood just doing that, embracing everything that I could. I used to stand in front of the TV and learn dance moves from music videos. And my mom would see these things and she would be like, okay, let me see what I can do to maybe manage some of this balled up energy that's running around. And so she asked me one year when I was in the second grade, and she asked me, she found this school that had performing arts in it where you could dance and do drama, theater, you can play music, different instruments, you can sing, you can draw and do art. And so I was like, I mean, yeah, sure, sign me up. I'm ready to go. Let's dive into it. And I went, and that was the beginning of the end from there. I was introduced to all the arts in that sense and pretty much dug into everything as I could. I was in majority of all of the clubs, as they call them. So I was in the dance club, the drama club, played some music here and there, was in the art club, and everything else just kind of took its own trajectory. I went there from third grade to fifth grade. Mm-hmm. Then after that, it was, you have to move on and upwards. And so I heard about the Performing Arts High School, which started in the sixth grade. And I was like, okay, yes, definitely want to go. The only thing was I had to pick a major. So I can only have one discipline that I wanted to choose.
You're what, 12? And you had to pick a major?
Right. And I was like, what do I do? But I decided to choose dance because I loved moving and loved, just using my body in that way. And so I auditioned, I got in, and that's when I started seriously training, learning all of the multiple disciplines, ballet, modern, jazz, all these things. I was like, oh, what are these? And from there, I just dug deeper into it. And that was what started and kind of generated all of majority of my dance background.
And I think every artist, dance and otherwise, often might come to a major inflection point and go like college or no college. Did you pursue dance in college?
I did pursue dance in college. It was a funny story. I knew I wanted to go to college, I just didn't know where. Mm-hmm. And I knew I wanted to continue my dance training in that way. And so I, was looking and weighing the options. everyone was kind of pushing for me to go to Juilliard. And I was like, what? I don't even know what that, that wasn't really a big thing. Well, it was a big thing, but I wasn't aware of it at that time.
I mean, I remember, yeah, it used to be before the internet, like you had to look it, like Dance Magazine put out a guide that had, this tells a lot about the patriarchy and white supremacy. It had point shoes next to schools when they had dance programs. Like that was like yellow pages for programs. Right. So I'm sure you're like, great, Juilliard. Okay.
Yeah. And I had not heard of the school before my, I want to say 10th or 11th grade year in school. So I really wasn't familiar with it at all. And then once I found out what it was, I was like, oh, it's a ballet school. I'm not really that strong in ballet, so I don't know. But I was able to, I went to one summer intensive out in Colorado, and one of the director of the dance program was a teacher at Juilliard. And so there were also Juilliard students there, and I was able to like see them in amazement, like, oh my gosh, wow. And from there, that's kind of what brought on that interest for me. But at the same time, I still didn't know. I was like, I'm not good enough. I don't know. I don't really want to audition. And I think it was a day or two before the application was due, my dance teacher and my guidance counselor came and took me out of my dance class and sat me down and was like, fill this out right now. Can't go back to class until you fill this out.
We need those kinds of advocates in our lives. Absolutely.
Right.
And so I'm sorry, I don't want to give away the ending.
I know, well, I filled everything out. I wound up going to the audition. I made it all the way through. And short time after that, I got the news that I got accepted into the school. And that is where I got my BFA from.
Nice. Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I think we have to give ourselves credit for the things we've achieved. It's not just forward looking. You know, everything you've clocked along the way, for sure.
Right.
So you're in New York now.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your first professional job as a dancer?
Oh, wow. I've had many small ones along the way, even during my training.
First, and I said job versus gig.
Yes. And I had I don't know what to call it, the pure luck and kind of amazing opportunity to join the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane dance company right after I graduated from the Juilliard School. Wow. And that was my first big job. And yeah, I just fell in love with it. I didn't know that that's the place where I wanted to dance at beforehand. But once I was there, I, found some roots there that I could dig into and another family that I can call mine, and stayed there for just over 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think we had sorted out, that might be how we first met in person when the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company was coming through Northeast Ohio and as part of an educational residence with the University of Akron and Dance Cleveland. And I think I had been on the ground like a month here setting up NCCAkron. So it was like, wait, we've met in real life too.
Yes.
And to do 10 years there, and you still have a relationship with them as well. As a repetiteur, setting pieces of Bill's. But I'm curious, that in itself is a chapter. How or when did you know you wanted to be a choreographer?
I want to say that my first instincts and intuitions into it actually happened when I was way younger, but I didn't know what that possibility, I didn't even know what that meant at the time. I would just play. Like, I was the only child, and I was like, had found and discovered dance, and I would start to play with my toys and choreograph pieces on them. That was kind of the first thing, but I didn't really know what I was doing at that time. And once I was in high school, I would choreograph little small things here and there. And that's kind of how I kind of started to get into it. But once I was at Juilliard and we actually had composition class where I really started to learn some of the tools, more mechanics of it and how it can be used, I think that's really where I found the like love for doing it. And yeah, and I, again, still at that time didn't know what I was really doing. I was just kind of playing and creating. But the people around me really enjoyed watching what I was creating and doing. And so, yeah, and so they kind of kept giving me that push to continue to choreograph in that way. And so I just continued to do it and find my own voice within that. And since then, I never stopped choreographing. Like I choreographed all through college and then even while dancing professionally with Bill and other companies, I still always find the time to choreograph, even if it was like just 1 or 2 pieces a year or something like that. I always tried to find that time to choreograph. Yeah.
That's pretty prolific. I was just want to acknowledge that too. And so where there isn't just one way of dance making. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate from my conversations with David Chimo. When I've asked him, like, what does GroundWorks look for in inviting and commissioning choreographers? And he's shared it often is different ways of working. So it's not about trying to follow a single lineage, but different practices, different processes, different starting places. Where do you start when you go to make a work?
I normally start with just movement because the way my body moves and its style, if we'll call it that, includes so many various disciplines and styles of dance. And so I always try to find a way where I can use the body to just express in that sense. And so I'll start with just movement in that sense. I'll put on some music that I love or like have some interest in using, and I will put that on and just start to move. And from there, many things happen. It kind of keeps evolving to the different stages of how to then put it together and to tell a story or not to tell a story or what to show in different relationships or not. And so movement is one big thing. And then a lot of times I also start using and incorporating music because a lot of my work is generated and based around the feelings that music has with the body. And I like to try to include that as much as possible because I love music. I also have a lot of people know this, some people don't know this, but I also DJ and I also make music and things.
Confessional, absolutely. Yeah. Out of the universe. Done.
Right. And so I always, in some way, shape, or form, I either make my own music or mix it, and do all those things in pretty much every single piece that I make. And that also started roughly around the same time when I was at school in Juilliard, where I actually really started to play with that as well. Just because it was there, it was around me, it was in my surroundings. It was going to a Juilliard school, which is prolifically known for its music department. And so you're surrounded by all these musicians and, and actors and all these things like this and dancers. And so it's like, how could you not be influenced by those things as they come along?
It doesn't surprise that environment would resonate for you artistically because of where you started originally in elementary school. So sometimes I think people will get very kind of like myopic and say, but I want to look like this. I want it to, and they're solely focused on that without realizing it's the type of place that you go to. It's what else is in the context that you'll be living and breathing and dancing that kind of bleeds across and informs you. And I'm glad that you brought up you were a DJ, because I was going to ask how that practice, how does your DJ practice inform your choreographic practice? If you might elaborate a little bit more.
Oh, yes, totally. That stage in that process is one of its own. It's kind of it has its own separate kind of setup for it that I still kind of play with, but I definitely have kind of a routine that I kind of work with now when dealing with that. And a lot of the times, like I said, I'll start with just playing whatever music that I kind of have interest to. Sometimes I'll make something beforehand and might want to play around with it. But a lot of times I will kind of use the movement that I make and the kind of energy or vibe, if I'll call it that, that's coming off whatever music I'm using. And then when I go to start to put it into the constraints of what the choreography is, I'll go back and manipulate or remake the music to actually fit on top of the music, so that then it gives it another elevated level to kind of connect to in that sense. And for me, it's a way that I can dig in deeper to feeling how that music can really, kind of enhance what the movement can be.
That's great. I mean, it's something I just want to name for anyone who may be less familiar with dance making at home. I think it's pretty rare choreographers who also make their own music. It's not something that they necessarily teach in school. And so for that, those skill sets to sort of develop and evolve together, and in many ways it gives you another paintbrush, something else to play with in addition to the bodies. Some people choose to collaborate and might have that dialogue. It sounds like you have that dialogue inside your own head and in your body. I love that.
Yes.
Speaking of dialogues in one's head, though, 10 years with Bill T. Jones. This is a strong artistic voice. And I'm curious, what from that experience are you conscious that you are carrying with you when you're making your own work, when you're teaching? And are there any specific things that you are trying to shed as you continue to seek finding your own voice? So, that it's something you can't ignore. You didn't just spring forth. So how do you wrestle with that idea of your professional experience with other artists when trying to also navigate your own way?
Yes, that is a great question.
Work in process, of course. Don't expect that you have it all figured out.
Oh, yes, of course. But yes, I mean, my mind would be kind of blown often. Just being in the room with a dance genius and knowing that the person in the room has, is that. And the information that you would receive day to day in the room during processes as we would create work, really was challenging for the dancer, the artists, to kind of dig deeper into what we were doing and creating. And I really, really cherished that because I like that kind of challenge. I like that push. I like the kind of really investigating and knowing what you were doing on stage at all times and kind of having its own background to it.
There's something extra live about that, right? Versus doing the work of a choreographer that's no longer with us, but like you're literally in dialogue, both in the process of making and because he casts such a long shadow as well. Sure.
Yes, exactly. And so having those challenges being presented and that open space to allow the dancers and the artists to really contribute in that way is something that I always, I hold dear to me just because I really love that process of working. So that's something that I've definitely taken and have ran with it and tried to create my own devices in that sense. And yeah, I mean, each piece that we made when I was with Bill, we started off with a completely different starting point. And I really cherish that. That was something that, you would not expect. You were like, oh, you're working with the same choreographer all the time. It's just this one person, but he's alive, he's in the room, and he is definitely, challenging what is around him. and, you know, incorporating all of those things into the works that he would make. And I just, yeah, so much information was tossed out into the space in the room. And, you know, you pick all of it as you can. And a lot of that has carried me through my like choreographing, is, you know, taking these gems, as what we'll call them. And for me, finding out a way where I can, you know, which jewels speak best to me, and how I want to kind of create and challenge the room in that sense. And I tend to use those often as they come out. And I have my own rediscoveries of what those are, just so that it's more personal for me and the work that I make. And there's a lot of things that, you know, as you go through all those processes, there's a lot of things where it's like, okay, no, we did this. I did not like that at all. So we are not going to take this gym along with us as we go. You know, there's also other things
baggage.
Where
Don't carry everything with you.
Exactly. And so, yeah, there are so many of those things that also that, you know, I try to steer away from. And then also some things that are just, you know, I'll start to make a piece and then not realizing it and be like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I'm doing the same thing that Bill was doing, like we did in this process. And I have to stop myself and say, okay, that's not what I want to do. Let me reset. Let me go back, dig in the bag of gems and see what else I can pull out. Just because I am my own artist, I am my own choreographer. And even though, you know, you can work with somebody for so long, of course, there are going to be influences that you take with you. But at the end of the day, I know that, you know, I'm speaking my own voice. And it's okay to take those gems and use them, but just use it and speak it in your own voice.
And there's something also about embodied history and experience that it's in like your body's subconscious as well, right? For 10 years, that's how you train to solve movement problems. And so it's extra courageous to step out and say, but I'm going to assert myself as well. And then I gather that there's part of your own practice to do that reflection. What's working? What's not working? Is this too familiar? Is this still my own? And I would love to have you describe, you know, if people are not familiar with Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane Dance Company's work, or in the larger history and canon of dance in the United States, specifically concert dance in this regard. Often he might be categorized as a postmodern dance theater maker, and I'm sure he would have thoughts on that categorization as well. So, how would you describe your movement style or aesthetic?
My movement style and aesthetic is roughly, I'm like, well, I'll just say roughly what my mission statement is for my company. I think that is the best wordage, and I'm sure I'm going to mess up what the actual words of it are.
Work in process.
Work in process, right? But the mission statement of my company is that we, as unique performing artists, will take our cultural backgrounds, put them in the room together, and create work that is based off of our current political environment, and use that to create works for the masses, whether that be dance artists or not. I want to be able for my work to speak to anybody, and it can speak to them where, you know, they agree with what they see, they enjoy what they see, or they might have some kind of internal feeling or thought about it, and, you know, they might not like it and they might want to express what that is, but they felt something. And that's what I want people to be able to dig into when kind of watching my work. Because I don't, and I have not, you know, sheered or shied away from talking about topics of interest that are always currently happening. Because I think it's a way where people can really relate and kind of come together in a way where they're looking at topics and situations as it's happening in real time. and they get to see it and kind of reflect on it and feel it in a different way by allowing the art and dance and movement and theater, all those things combined in it, to have them have that kind of visceral response to it.
Yeah, no, that's I want to affirm and sort of reflect on my experience with your work. I watched the mixtape piece that you had shared.
Mm-hmm.
And my notes in watching that were like, it's almost as if for both that and Another Day, you know, a different piece of yours, the sound score, the way you can play and manipulate that, it's almost like an oral aggregated news feed, right? Of headlines, of Facebook posts, of videos. And contrary to the idea of we go to the theater for a performance to escape reality, I felt like that was an invitation that you were like, it's still with you while you're watching this, and I'm just going to underscore it, and it's now a part of the actual sound and the entire piece. And it does make you notice things differently, watch things differently. I also appreciated just this while toggling in this aspect of postmodern dance theater. And I mean, where the whole field is like, what are we making right now? And then popular television, you know, categorizes something as jazz, and we're like, that's not jazz. So that's a whole other happy hour. But
yeah.
What I appreciated in watching your work is there is a sort of like embracing and juiciness of gesture, which is very postmodern, but you were not trying to distill it. We know there is no neutral body, and that was very much part of the Judson movement that led up to, and you were like, if I am going to embrace this gesture and maybe with the simplicity of it, but I'm going to let this actually cite the cultural things like, you know, voguing came out of that. You talk about everyone's cultural backgrounds and beings being in that room. And I was like, oh yeah, this, I do recognize this, because it is people not trying to just be the simplicity of the movement. But you were like, we're gonna, for lack of a better term, we're gonna allow this to have a whole style or colorized approach, because these are not neutral bodies in space. And I really appreciated that. So I wanted to offer that to you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. So in this idea, though, that it's not coming out of a single movement or lineage, what do you look for in a dancer? What sort of training, you know, is a part of your own physical practice? And when you are casting, what do you need a dancer to be able to do and hold?
Yeah, I love this question. It's always, people ask me this all the time, actually. And it's one of the things that I love for myself, being a versatile dancer. And I'll just claim that that's what I do. I can do so many different styles and genres. And I do very much incorporate, they're a part of my body. And so when they come out, they come out. And I very much look for that in dancers who I invite into the room. Can they jump between styles and genres of dance, different techniques? How are they able to adapt to all those things? And on top of adapting to all those things, am I able to see them as a person? If I can really see them as a person and see their joy, their passion for dance and for the art in that sense, and just really be able to let it go and let it free and in the room, that's somebody who I always want to, be working with and working around, just because I know for myself that that's pretty much how I grew up and how I express it in that sense, where it definitely is, my joy and love for dancing and what the body can do and how expressive it can be. And I feel like I can really show myself as clear, as pure. I can express all of my emotions about anything through my body. And if I can see that from somebody else, it's like, oh my God, yes, Yes, this.
And what I'm hearing that is the humanness. It's not someone who can perform joy, but someone who can truly embody or bring that. And whether it's joy or who they are as people or whatever emotions and realities you're grappling with in that moment.
Exactly.
Which is probably really, I mean, we know it's hard to teach. So that's something that's
Yes.
hard to develop too.
Right. Yes. I mean, it is definitely, I mean, that's something that, you know, my dancers in my company, they know already.
Oh, you might have frozen. I'm not sure if that's just on my end or not.
And like
Okay.
going for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, you know, I love that about them. And that's like, yeah, the more that they're able to be, you know, really just be themselves, because our energies feed off of each other when we're in the room, in the space. And just like you were saying, like all those energies, you know, help to piece works together.
Mm-hmm. I want to acknowledge that to our friends that are tuning in from all over. If you have questions, please post those in the chat, share them through Facebook Live. The GroundWorks team will be passing them on to Antonio and I. But we are going to pivot and start to talk about the work that you are developing for GroundWorks. And I'd love to go back in time for a minute and acknowledge you had been in discussions and had even some time in the studio with the GroundWorks dancers before COVID. So maybe you could let us know, like, what had you done so far?
That is a good, that's a good one. I'm like, oh my gosh, when was that? At this time, you know, time is, we don't know what that is anymore, right? Yeah. What is it? But in the fall of 2019, I was guest teaching and choreographing for Cleveland State University. And during that time, while I was there throughout the whole semester, me and David had been in talks of, you know, me coming on and choreographing for the company in the spring. That just happened for the summer. And so I was like, I'm really amazed, like, thank you. And I'm, you know, ready to jump into it. And so we had talked and discussed a little bit, since I was going to be starting in this, you know, in the spring, summertime, that since I was there in the fall, I could have a few, you know, play sessions, as they would be, just so I can get to know the dancers can get to know me and how I move a little bit, just so we can kind of, you know, kind of see and like figure each other out in that sense. And so I just started, I can't remember how many times I, you know, worked with the dancers in GroundWorks, but I think we had maybe like 3 or 4 times in the studio we were able to just like play. I made several phrases with them. I took them through some of my choreographic madness of tools that I have just to, you know, test the waters and kind of see, you know, how they were able to adapt to those things, and also, you know, kind of play around with figuring out like, oh, these, you know, movement ideas and motifs work really well. And so I was like, okay, I'm really on board to like, you know, jump into it in that sense. And so that happened in the fall, and COVID happened very soon after that, in the beginning.
We're familiar with that,
yeah. Yeah. And so at this point, that's pretty much where I have started and into things with its actual physical work.
And so looking forward to this fall, my understanding is that you will be returning to Cleveland, and investigations are taking place for how you may safely go back into the studio and work within physical relation to each other, correct?
Correct. That is correct.
What kind of work do you want to make now in this moment? We have an onslaught of digital content. You know, there's also a question of like, will it be performed live someday? How are you wrapping your head around this choreographic commission in this moment?
You know, adapting to the times has been a really accurate statement for all of this. And I have kind of put my brain in both spaces where I know we have the limitations of being in person for a lot of things. And so I kind of been wrapping my head around, what would it mean to make or generate a dance film in a sense, and what that might mean and how we can go about creating that. But for myself, I love live theater because that's just, there's nothing more special and genuine than that when it, comes down to it. We all love the urge to sit in the theater or watch a performance live. And so I've kind of taken on both brain sets of trying to figure out, okay, now if I create a dance film, that could be its own thing, but then what if I also can kind of double layer it, and when live can happen again, can kind of put them together and create a live experience that also happens and evolves around a film adaptation of the piece.
It's something that when I think of some chronic pain points in the live performing arts, particularly for dance, is you may work for 8 weeks or 8 months, and then you perform it for 3 nights. And so it's like it only happened in that moment. So I love this idea that the challenge and moment of COVID is both an opportunity to explore dance on film, but it also sounds like it'll extend the life of the piece, right? If it can live both digitally and then continue to evolve when we can perform back in person again.
Yes.
I want to tap your music side. We've gotten a question also. So how are you thinking about music making in relation to this project? And specifically, do you think of movement as having a sound? Are these things complementary or representative of each other?
I'll start off with going into it musically for myself. When I was in the studio playing with the dancers in the fall, I had a few pieces of music that I was playing around with them, and I really loved a few of them. And I've been holding off on them. I'm like, I'm not going to use these or touch these until I'm able to, jump back into the studio with GroundWorks, because I know like these resonate really strong with me within that process.
Oh, and you're saving them. I like that. You're like
saving them, yes. And so I have kind of started and kind of continued to like listen to them over time, and have started to figure out different layers that I kind of want to jump into with them. And one of my original thoughts about the piece that I was going to make would be based on how sounds, while generating movement, can create its own sound score in a sense. And I would kind of take these developments and findings as I go through them and kind of figure out a way to like enhance them within the piece to make to create the musical score for it, but then also to create the soundscape for it as well, so that there can be a beautiful relationship, I think, between them. Yeah.
There's something, so what I'm hearing there is that it's both complementary and one informs the other, particularly if it's like, oh, not only do I like this movement, but this movement makes this sound. And there almost could be like a palindrome when I think about how, extending the life of the work. So you could design a sound score based on the movement that's performed live, use that sound score to make a film, but because of the magic of editing, then it doesn't have to line up. The movement and the sound score don't have to be the same necessarily, because you can lay them any way you want. So it's like, oh, which came first? You can't tell. This is how we do it. Yeah, I love this idea of play. I'm curious, one of the things that I noticed in your work is you seem to embrace the core, like a group of people. You certainly have duets and trios and solos. That's my personal bias. I love a big group work. I love the
Me too.
boards. GroundWorks is a purposefully intimate, tight-knit company. So I was curious, is that a choreographic challenge or something that you've been thinking about?
Yes, definitely. And that's something that, because I'm the same. I love a big, since I first started choreographing, kind of really digging into it, big groups have always just been thrown at me. And I'm like, what do I do with this? Okay, playtime. And I, kind of figure it out. So I always love those, to have those. But I also love the intimacy of a small group as well. And I have been, especially recently, have been really trying to dive in and dig into what it means to make a work for a smaller group of people, and kind of finding out how those relationships and interactions between those smaller groups of people can also be an enhanced moment. And so I've been really excited to kind of dive into the work in that sense, just knowing that I'm going to be working with just a smaller group of people and trying to figure out those and navigate through those ways on how I can actually like make a work speak how I want it to speak, but using less bodies. And that might, for myself, I know that's going to mean the content of whatever it is that I'm making is going to be, is probably going to speak louder in that sense, just because you're really going to be able to see and get closer to not having, so many bodies in a space.
But I think what also comes up is the performance space we're talking about will fluctuate.
Yes.
When you're creating something for the screen, your proscenium got that much smaller and you might not see the whole body, much less 10 bodies. So it could be an advantage to be able to say, I'm really just going to focus in, on this 1 out of 5 dancers too. So that's something else, I think, with how much you contract and how much you expand as you're playing with the long arc of this work. That's cool.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I'm kind of also looking at it because I'm a very visual person. Also, just from growing up, I watched a ton of TV, probably too much. But I still continue to do that because I love it, and that's like, my downtime if I get it, is to watch movies and TV shows. And I love how they can manipulate situations and scenarios just by using, this box that you have. They can make you think or feel certain things. They can kind of take you on a different story than what you might be able to experience in a live setting.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that in our prep call, just generationally having been able to watch, dance on TV, and also how you can play with time differently, right? You don't have to work out a transition to get the dancer from stage left to stage right so they're ready for the next section. Instead, you can just jump cut. They're already over there. There we go.
Right.
That's a different way of thinking through transitions, and also in this shorter way. I know you had some thoughts as well about audiences' attention time spans too.
Yes.
And I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, definitely. I know for this generation, just because of how the media, social media, and everything is set up, everything is in these truncated time spans. And we're so busy and active, we need things to capture our attention faster because we have so many things to do, so many posts to look at and things like that. And so I have always, as social media has become bigger and bigger and bigger, and I've always kind of found a way to kind of keep in mind that I'm trying to reach the masses of audiences. So in terms of that, how do I get them interested and keep them interested? And I was like, well, I have to adapt in that sense to how we all view things. And we view things in very quick speeds, very short time, time spans. And so I'm always interested in and intrigued on how I can keep those, fast-paced interactions happening so that we can keep the audience engaged in it, because that's what everybody is familiar with. And those come with its own challenges, just because, real life human bodies sometimes can't make those transitions happen all the time so quickly. But it's definitely something that I have embraced in creating my work, and just, really adapting to the time that we're in, and kind of finding out how I can incorporate all of these things, how our space and time navigated within the culture that we live in right now. That was a hard thing. I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because this was something that I've actually kind of dealt with in my work, and kind of realized kind of early on as I was with Bill and dancing with Bill. The history and the legacy of his work comes from a time period where they could make pieces and they could go for however long they needed to, because they were exploring, they were sharing all the work that they have done. And so there was duets and solos that were 20, 45 minutes and things like that. And I was like, wait, what do you mean there's a duet that's 45 minutes? What does this mean? What's happening in this duet for 45 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so kind of having those things and learning those repertories, that was it embraced its own challenge within that. And of course, coming back to it, it was a thing as well where Bill was challenging that of his own original work as well. He was like, yes, we were exploring and doing all these things then, and the work was 45 minutes, but if we're going to present it now, it can't be 45 minutes. We have to do some editing. We have to trim it down just to, keep it as vibrant as an experience as people might have felt, when they first originally saw it. And I know even from having that experience to now, and then also kind of seeing the trajectory of where and how social media keeps growing in the sense, I always try to keep that in mind when I'm making my works, where yes, I can make a 30-minute duet if I wanted to, but I have to know exactly what I'm saying or wanting to, convey in that, might be a long duet. But how do I keep my audience interested in that sense? What are the topics or information that we're going to get while we're talking and investigating, and, that time spent like that?
Yeah, I have a friend who makes dance films, Carrie Ann Shimsham, who told me once, with dance films, she said, if you're going to make a 20-minute dance film, it should be just as good, if not better, than 4 5-minute dance films. And I've often thought about that ratio when I go to live performance, and you're like, was this a 45-minute idea? Yeah.
Right.
Oh goodness. I am curious. We talked a little bit in our prep about living in different places, knowing artists that make work in different places. What do you think now as an adult it means to make work in Cleveland, to be an artist, to make dances? How is Cleveland maybe informing that aesthetic or the viewpoint or the way we make work here?
Because Cleveland is my home, so I always have this big chunk of my heart that's there, because it influenced everything that I have had and carry with me throughout all this time. Even though I've been living in New York for a very long time now and have traveled around the world, to have that experience and having to travel and see different things and get different experiences, to come back and share those different experiences and those different concepts and different ideas and different viewpoints of things. For me, I think it's so great. Just because I know for myself, when I was younger, if I had not seen anything else except for what was in Cleveland, I wouldn't have started the trajectory that I have been on since I was younger. And so knowing knowing that, taking great acknowledgement to know that I've, kind of had a good sea of things. And I also know where my roots are and kind of that upbringing, but I'm also not so familiar with current Cleveland in that sense. Just because I've been away, and I would kind of come in and check in from time to time, but not really able to be there more, withstanding for a long period of time to really, get a real feel of what's happening in the city. But since last year, I was able to spend more time there, and I kind of see, I kind of feel the vibrations of what's kind of happening. And so now I have this greater understanding of, we're going to put it in a circle of like starting where I started, kind of going a whole full span, and now coming back and returning in that sense to share kind of, or not even kind of, but really share the scope of where I started and kind of where I am at this moment in time. And being able to place it in, one location, I think is really, something that I'm really trying to have hold me down in that sense while creating this work. Just knowing that, there is that natural energy that's there in Cleveland that I definitely ultimately will just connect to, because it happens every time I'm there. But then also knowing that those vibrations are different than when I was growing up, and kind of embracing how I can like look at and examine how I feel with these new vibrations as they kind of come out.
There's something, I mean, very deeply personal about that, as I think anyone can relate to if they moved away from home to go to college to build an adult life. And then when you go home, you're like, oh, for me, I'm like, oh, home is kind of cooler than I thought it was, from your limited experience when you were growing up. But you also said something that I think mirrors your personal experience, the access and experiences you've had all over the world, and then how you're able to drop those in coming back to Cleveland. Cleveland is very metropolitan in that regard too, whether it's the front triennial for visual art, whether it's the myriad of dance companies that Dance Cleveland has brought in that continues to expand our vantage point. I am one that is often making the case, particularly to people who have not been to Ohio. Oh, you don't get it. All roads dance through Ohio. Like, we're a stop for everyone, for sure. We're rounding up just on our hour. I have two final questions for you, unless anyone else wants to offer up in the chat. One of them is from the chat. What are you most challenged by at this time as an individual artist? We started off talking about how you're working so much, which I don't know that everyone can say that, but what sort of challenges would you want to name right now?
I would say one would be connections with people. And I think the only reason I'm even saying that is because, like, as a dancer and as a mover, as an artist, we're so used to and have become so accustomed to being in a room with each other and being very physical in our movements with each other, and just also just how we interact with each other, just because it's a physical art form. And so to have this time period where we've been away from each other for so long and trying to, still be connected, virtually is one thing that's so great. But I know, like, there for myself is really trying to figure out how to create that same kind of physicality and connection with the person intimately in that sense, where we can be close to each other or touch each other or be in the same space with each other. Is that going to be a thing where people embrace that, or something that people shy away from at this point in time? Just because that has been the biggest challenge that's happening right now. And I think that's definitely going to affect and has affected, the dance making as it happens right now. And so I know for myself, that is, one big challenge going into it. Another big challenge that I would say would be, because the cultural political climate is so crazy right now, is how do we even start to create work in that sense, either without talking about these subjects or topics, or talking about these topics and subjects and seeing how they kind of like bounce off or trigger people and understanding. I've had some really hard, challenging times just because of the current climate of how everything has been kind of turning out in the world, and kind of, how do I place my work in this? I normally would jump right into it, like, oh, we're gonna just, let's talk about these experiences and put it in the work and have it be a thing. But at the same time, it becomes where it's so hectic, it's so overwhelming, where it's actually hard to talk about it.
It's because there's a rawness. It's so close to the surface. We normally have maybe some expansiveness that allows people to operate on a spectrum, but I'm reminded, as you said, that if the body is not neutral, making dance or anything right now is not a neutral idea.
Right.
And I think that that's universal, probably not just for dance making, but as a society, as a people, we're all going, why do I do anything? And want to put myself forth with that. Just some existential crises making moments.
Right. No, it's true.
One that would be paralyzing. Yeah.
Right.
Goodness. Maybe we can end on a more forward-thinking or positive-looking note. Although it's still, I would say you seem as a very positive person.
Yes.
Yeah,
I try to be as much as possible.
Dance makers find a way.
Right.
What is the best piece of creative advice that you have ever received? Either to making a career in this field, or something that you find is a great mantra when you find yourself perhaps stuck. But I wonder if you might share that for us.
Oh, definitely. And I think this really comes into how I work and generate movement and expressive ideas, and also just in life general ideas. As I really try to find that deep internal part of myself that I really connect to and hold on to. And I know that that's there, and I can then like root that within inside the body, and then allow everything else to kind of go out in this very expansive way and manner to just share my own self or your own self. No matter what the obstacles of, may maybe put in front of you, you always have that deep inner connection to who you are and what you want to do, and what things you might want to achieve. And as long as you hold on to those things and just like let them, root it, and then let everything else just like shine through and push through, you'll be able to, overcome all those obstacles as they come. You'll be able to like jump through those hurdles. You'll be able to express yourself in that way, and, not feel too bogged down on them, just because you're, deeply interconnected with your own self, and, not afraid to really allow that to be expressed or shown to anybody.
Not just creative advice. That sounds like good life advice, a strong sense of self and anchoring oneself. I think that is a great place to jump off into the weekend too, and the continued unknown during these COVID times.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much, Antonio. I hope you can feel all of the virtual applause coming from all over. Yes, a big round of applause. And thank you, GroundWorks, for inviting us to be able to chat and share this publicly. I understand it will be available if you missed it in this moment or want to make sure to send it a friend's way. It'll be available on Facebook Live and on GroundWorks YouTube channel. So, Antonio, until we get to meet again.
I know, which hopefully will be soon.
Okay, yes. I like it.
Yes, thank you so much, Christy. It was awesome talking with you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Good night, y'all.
Good night.